For this session, I was joined by Clint Conlin, who's a modern workplace specialist within Microsoft. The session was part of our Microsoft Week Wales series of events, and we were talking all about Teams. So looking back at the beginning of 2020 and the impact that the pandemic's had on the way that people work and Microsoft's response to that, and how Teams has become part of everyday life for the majority of people.
Just very, very quickly, our focus is around cloud services, primarily helping customers around security, productivity, and what we call agility, so moving services into the cloud.
Hi, thanks for joining us. You're listening to Straight Talking 365 with Mark Lawton and guests.
For the first session, I'm pleased to be joined by Clint Conlin, who's the modern workplace specialist in technology for social impact side of Microsoft. I won't steal his thunder. I'll let him introduce himself in a second. I just wanted to very quickly take us back to the beginning of 2020. It seems a hell of a long time ago now, doesn't it? And so much has happened since then. But funnily enough, coming back from a meeting with Microsoft, and probably the last time I think that I was in London, but that was February, sort of towards the end of February 2020. And even then I thought, Teams is everywhere I look at the moment. Microsoft were clearly pushing Teams really hard. So even then, before the pandemic hit, Teams had a massive profile from a Microsoft point of view. And I'd like to introduce Clint Conlin now. Seems like a good time to do that. Welcome,
Excellent.
Clint. Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
Do you want to just tell me a little bit about yourself and your role in Microsoft?
Yeah, sure. So Clint Conlin, modern workplace specialist. So anything in the Microsoft 365 stack is my area of expertise. Generally, if you think of Microsoft terms, level 100 to 200 across things like security, compliance, Teams, and these have been the hot topics since COVID, struck globally.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that Microsoft do other things other than Teams, don't they? So it just seems that Teams is the dominant product at the moment, isn't it? Hence why we're starting off with Teams. Brilliant. So, yeah, I mean, 2020 has obviously been a massive year of change for lots of reasons. So thinking back to before sort of COVID hit, so earlier in 2020, and maybe this time last year, what were your Microsoft's focuses around Microsoft 365 and Teams in particular?
Yeah, sure. I always like to start these types of questions with a caveat that I'm not part of the product group, so I wasn't involved in shaping the direction of the products. But it's quite interesting that when I was reflecting on the journey we've been in and over the last year, it's probably worth highlighting that Microsoft Teams actually turned 3 in March 2020. So a lot of people think that Microsoft Teams was brand new this year because of, as you mentioned, that huge marketing push that we've seen. When we think of the roadmap, Microsoft 365, and before it was called Microsoft 365, we were talking Office 365 and enterprise mobility and security and Windows. The goal was always to allow people to be able to work from anywhere on any device securely. That roadmap and the technologies that were available didn't change an awful lot, but we did see a reprioritization to really, bolster the secure remote working that we needed.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and then obviously, again thinking back to sort of beginning of March, which again seems a hell of a long time ago. Yeah. Obviously, COVID started to have an impact. Then I remember working with a couple of customers at that time on Teams deployments where we just about managed to get the users trained before they shut the office down and sent them home to work, which from their point of view timing was perfect. So, with lots of customers looking to move people out of the office at that time, how did you find that? How was life in Microsoft? Chaotic, I'm assuming.
Chaotic's probably the best word. So at the start, I probably should have mentioned I work exclusively with non-profits and the United Nations in EMEA, so enterprise customers. And same as any commercial organisations, there was a huge scramble to get devices and also to get the expertise and partners that could support the migration to Teams and also the quick wins that you could get from a hybrid estate. So I spent a lot of my time basically just channeling requests from customers to try and find partners who had availability. I liken it sometimes to the stock market. I was putting shouts out who has a consultant for VPN, who has a consultant for Teams, and just trying to pair up the right people at the right time.
Yeah, Matt, I remember, but similar sort of time, mid-March time, one of our customers had to buy, configure, and send out almost 500 laptops because obviously clearly they weren't geared up for home working, and suddenly they had that impact. I mean, some, did it seamlessly. I mean, ourselves, it was fairly straightforward because we were already using Teams, we were already using it from the cloud. So, our help desk guys and girls just went home basically and carried on doing what they're doing. But yeah, a lot of organizations had to react really, really quickly. And obviously over the last, thinking from March to where we are now, December, good grief. Yeah, in December now. We've seen a phenomenal amount of development within Teams over that period for obvious reasons since March. So can you talk us through some of the key developments that you've seen over the last 8 or 9 months?
Yeah, I know we were speaking about this offline before we joined, and I did my homework. There has been 185 features added to Microsoft Teams since March.
Oh, thanks for doing that. Yeah, I hadn't got that number, but yeah, thank you. Good grief.
And when you look at these things that came in, it wasn't simply they made it look slightly different or they moved a button. This was, proper transformational product changes that were taking place. Some of the key ones for me, again, selfishly thinking of the non-profit sector, but I'm aware it was used in commercial. There was a tool called Virtual Visits that was released. So Virtual Visits would give our customers and our non-profits, specifically those who were in the healthcare or social care realms, a means to allow, their beneficiaries to be able to select from calendar availability of set staff and then book a Microsoft Teams meeting directly with them without sharing all of the calendar information of the staff. So that's something that was very, very useful and powerful, that was accelerated in terms of prioritization from Microsoft to help meet that need.
I was going to say, was that something that was in the roadmap anyway and brought forward?
Yeah, it was, and it actually brings together something called Microsoft Bookings and Microsoft Teams, and up until that point, Microsoft Bookings was seen much more as a SMB type tool. It's a simple mechanism for allowing scheduling of services, but we've seen that would actually fill that gap of how do we replace face-to-face meetings and help to make it very, very easy to schedule those and access those from any device, which was key.
Yeah, I mean, I will cover some of the ones that obviously have impacted us and, sort of most of our customers. So, obvious ones being meeting enhancements and particularly the video enhancements. Some would cynically say that's to compete with people like Zoom, but I'm not going to go there. But yeah, I think there's
no point shying away from it. Of course it is. I think the one that comes to mind where I was chased on a daily basis was, the 7x7 view, being able to see 49 screens at the same time. And when I first seen the request, I was like, how useful is that? But when you started to speak to people who worked in the likes of the education sectors who were now trying to, maintain a classroom and keep an eye on, who's actually engaged with the sessions, it became apparent how useful that was. Likewise, rhyming off some of the other key areas, things like the backgrounds is fun. I think fun was needed, to kind of get us through some of this. And the ability to then bring together mode where you can see all of the participants in a single screen. The interesting piece around that is it's quite cool, it's quite fun, but there was studies done that showed that it actually helped reduce video call fatigue because you're not constantly looking across all of the individual participants. Yeah,
I mean that was something that nobody else does. Obviously, I think that was developed for education, wasn't it, to kind of replicate that environment where you're in a lecture theatre or so we'll cover some of that towards the end, and obviously there's I understand there's a limit to what you can share in terms of what the future looks like for the roadmap for Microsoft 365 in general, but obviously Teams specifically. Anything that you think is coming along that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, there's actually a whole host of new features that we're hoping to bring out now in December. So one of the biggest that I'm chased on is something referred to as virtual breakout rooms. So the ability to start a meeting and then have sub meetings where the organizer can then call everyone back from those meetings. So it's a great way for small team ideation and then reporting back into a larger event as well.
Yeah, that's the number one request, or the number one question we get, and when we run these sessions is when will we see breakout rooms?
So I'll cross my fingers. I'm not in product group, but December is what the public roadmap is showing just now. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant.
A few others. The larger meeting rooms. So we refer to this as an interactive Teams meeting, and there is a limit of 300 participants now, up from 250 a few months back. We are bringing in a capability with an additional add-on to bring that number up to 1,000 interactive participants. And I think we are going to see the lines being blurred between what's referred to as an interactive Teams meeting and Teams live events, which I'm sure you'll touch on in your engagement later on.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Yes, that's 300. I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But yeah, we've run both interactive and live events. Obviously, remote working's produced lots of additional challenges for organisations, non-profits that you work on, but obviously wider across small and medium-sized businesses. How's Microsoft addressing this challenge?
Yeah, like I say, I think Microsoft, from a technology standpoint, has been geared up over the last probably 2 or 3 years towards allowing that secure remote work from anywhere. But what we've done a really good job of is starting to, make it much easier to find the appropriate documentation and how-to guides to actually take you through how to set this up and how to, get the very best adoption that you can from the products. Of course, old school IT, it used to be your project finished when, the switchover was made. New IT is very much, we need to be making sure that the business is getting as much value as possible from any technical solutions that are put in place. So a few kind of key areas is, there's now a really good remote teamwork guide that's a nice hub for all of the different variants, from IT pro guidance to end user videos for training. We also have something called the Microsoft 365 Adoption Hub. Again, it ties in nicely with user adoption and change management, and again tells you how to build up that successful deployment of Teams, Office 365, OneDrive for Business, SharePoint, you name it. So a lot of effort in there. And probably finally, and most importantly, I'm very security focused, is we've created the Zero Trust Deployment Center as well. So this idea that we shouldn't explicitly trust a user just because they've provided credentials. There is a number of factors that need to come into play around the identity, the user's device that they're on, the risk that we may have seen from that user in the past. So the Zero Trust Deployment Center is a great resource for that.
Yeah, I've noticed Microsoft have started to put a lot more functionality in things like Microsoft 365 Business, which is obviously targeted for those sort of organisations, 300 seats and below. But we find a lot of customers have not even deployed half the things that come out of the box with Office 365, like multi-factor authentication being the obvious one. So I think particularly for home workers, as you say, just getting that baseline security. Advanced threat protection is another one. We cover some of that security stuff in one of the sessions this week as well, in a little bit more depth. Tomorrow morning we're running a securing your business environment session as well, because absolutely there are lots of bolt-ons you can bring to security, but there's also a lot of things out of the box that maybe with a bit of configuration work, and again Microsoft are making that configuration work a little bit easier. So I think we've probably covered the other two questions I was going to ask you as we've gone through, but the final one really was sort of any tips for customers looking to deploy Teams for the first time or accelerate the rollout of Teams that they're currently doing.
So I think, touching on what I mentioned earlier, probably the key piece is make sure that user adoption and change management is part of the process. And it really needs that senior stakeholder buy-in and support. So the best Teams deployments that then result in the best adoption, from what I've seen in the non-profit sector, is those that are championed by, the senior executives. The time taken to build up at what we refer to at Microsoft as a champions network, but it's those early adopters and allowing for that feedback loop of what's working and what isn't is so important, because again, I know many of the people in the call are IT focused, IT pros or IT decision makers. There's not enough bandwidth in IT to be the sole focal point for training people on any solution from Microsoft. So you need to get these people bought into Microsoft Teams and doing the work for you within their departments as well. One other point before we kind of move as well, Mark, I would say is make sure you utilise these resources. I'm aware that there's so many that sometimes it's a challenge to decide what one to use when, but do make sure that you're aware of what is available to you. And probably the last piece I'd like to finish on is, if we want to move quickly, then we should be utilising experienced partners who have done this numerous times and have the success cases to go with it.
Yeah, brilliant. Of course, I would agree with that, with all of that. But yeah, I mean, we use the stat, and I think it probably came from Satya a while back, around the fact that Microsoft saw something like 2 years digital transformation crunched into 2 months or something like that. I mean, that sitting here now, that seems quite reasonable. Yeah,
and we had a kind of customer case study that was released in September for the Royal British Legion. They had an 18-month programme of work planned and ready to go from February. They ended up deploying, I think you touched on it earlier with one of your customers, but 1,500 laptops were deployed. They moved all of the local files into OneDrive and SharePoint with Teams in the front end in the space of 4 weeks. So yeah, there's so many stories like that if you'd said beforehand that someone could even achieve it, you would say no chance, but it can be done. And I guess that's quite a nice lesson, that I don't suggest that we try and do every programme of work that would normally take 18 months in 4 weeks, but there is that element that if we take slightly more risks, we can actually meet the end goals for these projects a lot quicker by being agile.
Yeah, I think the overall takeaway is it's just phenomenal how quickly people can adopt. Thinking about the sort of end users of this technology, but also the organisations. And I think things like whether you call it home working or flexible working, however you want to position it, people just seem to have generally embraced it. And I think I've got some slides that talk about some of the impact and what it's meant to organisations. But yeah, it just shows, I guess, when people are given the authority, the trust to work from home, they just get on with it. And I think a lot of organisations have changed their view on homework, and I'm guessing Microsoft themselves.
Not as much in Microsoft ourselves, because we have, for the most part, always been geared up to be a remote organisation. We have 140,000 staff globally, and certainly there will be certain roles that did need to adapt more than others. Myself pretty excluded again, because I regularly, I made the joke earlier, Mark, I do miss my trips down to London every couple of weeks. It's a sad day when you miss a red eye to Glasgow to London for 6 a.m. But the face-to-face is necessary. But I think what's probably come out of this across the whole is that people can be trusted to do their work from anywhere if you give them the appropriate tools.
Brilliant. I think that's a perfect note to kind of finish this little section on, Clint. So appreciate your insights and your honesty, and brilliant. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Just very, very quickly, our focus is around cloud services, primarily helping customers around security, productivity, and what we call agility. So moving services into the cloud.
Thanks for joining us. You're listening to Straight Talking 365 with Mark Lawton and guests.